All right, man. So we are live. We are live talking about a subject that I think is highly underrated, right? Would you
Sure.
agree? Um, you know, I want to start off by talking a little bit. Obviously, we're going to discuss sleep, the importance of sleep. Um, my personal story with why I started paying attention to sleep was probably, I think, 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe. I can't remember. I had a car wreck, and I was really big at the time, really into lifting, just moved here, working with a friend of mine. And car wreck, broken arm, surgery, right? And when I had the surgery, I was probably about 217 pounds on my wrist, right? And just like any meathead, when you get in a car wreck, you realize your arm is broken. You look down at it, you're like, well, there goes 4 months of lifting, right? That was my first kind of thought was, oh, man, I can't lift, right? I can't train. So what happened to me going to get surgery and going through the process of recovery, I described we could probably deal with a call. Became very relied on pain pills afterwards, to the problem that it became a point where it was addressed, like the issue was addressed, and I started using them for the pain. Then I started using them for the sleep, and then you kind of put you in a daze, and fast forward, you have an issue. You have an issue with pain medication, man. And, it's very cliche, right? You hear it all the time. People get involved with opioids, they get an addiction, and now it's affecting all areas of your life. And I started using those to sleep better. Even after the recovery was there, I was using them to sleep. And fast forward about 3 months later, I'm 191 pounds, not lifting very much. A lot of issues with the pain medication. I was in very poor health. I mean, probably the worst health I've ever been in. And when I started coming off pain medication, I started to realize the sleep was the number one thing, right? And I became very in tune with what was going on, right? We all take. How many people man, take NyQuil to sleep? I hear it all the time. Oh, I take NyQuil to sleep.
Tylenol PM.
Tylenol PM so I can sleep. Even melatonin, man, right? Like they're relying on these things. And I became very interested through some of the things that you were talking about improving sleep. And I started reading about it, started getting into it. And talking to more and more people, I started realizing in performance with athletes, people building muscle and clients, not just general population people, right? The problem that people were having was they're not recovering. They have daily stressors. Their sleep is really poor, right? What was the stat that over the last 100 years we've seen a decrease by 20% in our sleep every night? Mm-hmm. And I'll point people to the Joe Rogan podcast with Dr. Waters. Isn't Dr. Waters is his name? Walker. And we've started to realize the importance of sleep and how many people were not getting good sleep. Jeff Nichols is another one. Probably the first time I heard somebody talk about sleep was a Sorenett Summer Strong event. And it really opened my eyes to what we're not getting in sleep. So I want to use this to build awareness to what we need from sleep. Recently, I got a buddy of mine who's a jiu-jitsu practitioner, world champion, master's levels, very good at jiu-jitsu. He choked the fire out of me one time at a tournament, right? Which doesn't mean anything, right? He made a comment on one of our posts that he quit drinking alcohol. And he started having dreams, right? And he wasn't an alcoholic, right? A couple glasses of wine here and there at night, right? And people think like, oh, that calms me, that relaxes me, more of a sedative type sleep.
Yeah.
Not really a real sleep. And how many of us drink alcohol at night, try to sleep better? Not only that, another thing you combat is what people call the sleep machismo, right? And Dr. Walker called it sleep machismo, where you get so many people that are social media influencers and they talk about sleep when I'm dead.
Yep.
All night, sleep all night. You don't need that much sleep. You don't blah, 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 blah. And I just think that's a false narrative to start talking to people about it, because guess what? You do need sleep. there is a direct link to mortality rate and lack of sleep, right? And I think on a general population, we can address that. But I think on a performance level, we can address it with kids, right? We see student athletes who are losing sleep because they have so much homework, right? Or stressors from just being a kid. Athletes who sleep less get injured more. That's proven scientific rate, right? Decrease in testosterone levels, right? I think, what was the study? 3 days in a row of less than 6% saw a 16% decrease in testosterone levels in teenage men, teenage boys, which leads to performance, muscle contraction, recovery. So what I wanted to do, Mike, is raise the awareness of getting better sleep. There is no connection to sleep and laziness, right? You hear people say that, oh, you sleep all the time. All right, there are lazy people that take naps during the day and sleep too much, or they're just down and out. They're usually like that because they're not getting sleep at night. They're up at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. I want to raise the awareness of the importance of sleep. I want to do more of these, but then I want to be able to give people tips on how to get better sleep. I'll tell people what I did, right, about sleep. You've been really into sleep, and you've called sleep the #1 performance-enhancing drug that people aren't using. Tell me how you got so involved in sleep research and sleep study, some personal experiences and people you've worked with, and just educate us a little bit on what you know is the most important, why sleep is so important, whether you're trying to burn fat, perform better, be a good mom, be a good student. There's not a person in the world that sleep doesn't affect.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about your history with it, and then we'll start some dialogue from there.
Yeah, I think I originally got into looking at sleep from a research perspective way back in 2014, I think it was, about when I graduated from Carolina. I picked up Sean Stevenson's book, Sleep Smarter, I think is the title. And he had some good stuff in there, specifically on circadian rhythms and looking at light and temperature and food consumption, and then also discussing supplementation and kind of the whole gamut of sleep. So that kind of kicked the door open, so to speak, and then I started going down individual rabbit trails as I got further into it. Anecdotally, I know for myself, I've gone through periods of very, very poor sleep, everything from not experiencing dreams, so not really getting into REM sleep, but then also having periods where I'd wake up 10, 15 times a night, so wouldn't really go through those consecutive stages of sleep. It would be more segmented sleep, and then also kind of going down a different rabbit trail, looking at the hormonal implications of different lifestyles and then how those might affect sleep. So, for example, the type of individual who gets up 3-4 times a night, consistently has to use the restroom, what's going on there hormonally? It's not just a common occurrence in society as many would believe it is, but there's actually a lot of biochemistry that's taking place behind the scenes. So starting to investigate things on that route, and then looking at within clients, anecdotally, they also mentioned a lot of positive experiences when we begin to hone in on lifestyle factors and figuring out what is their biggest obstacle or hurdle to improving their body composition. And a lot of times it was sleep. So for those individuals, they might go on a vacation, they might deload, and I'd say, don't track anything, don't keep up with anything, just sleep as much as possible. And let's see what happens when you come back. And about 90% of the time, most of those individuals come back and they're leaner and they're stronger and they're lighter. And that's with not looking at any metrics. And so a lot of times this reduction in stress leads to an improvement in sleep and then subsequent changes in body composition. So it's kind of a positive feedback cycle. When you feed one, it then kind of tapers down and affects the other ones as well. So that's kind of how I got into it. And then I found that the further I looked into the research, there was so many different factors which affected sleep, similar to training. You got volume, intensity, duration, overall macrocycles, microcycles. There's so many finer points that sleep is just the same. And sleep is also developing so quickly from a research front that if you're trying to keep up with it and what's coming out in literature as of today, it's a lot tougher than it is with most other fields. So I found that looking at it from just a supplementation angle was fairly limited, as the body tends to have a lot of feedback mechanisms that will overcompensate and quote unquote pick up the slack when one of them fails. So supplementation usually kind of becomes a defaulted to crutch by many. And so so then I started digging into the neurotransmitter side and kind of the hormone side, and then looking at, well, there's also this environmental perspective. What we do during the course of the day kind of sets up how we sleep through the night, versus a lot of people view it as what I do 20 minutes or 30 minutes before I go to bed sets up for how I sleep well. And so it's kind of reversing your psychology and thinking what I do in the first 20 to 30 minutes when I awake will actually dictate how I sleep the next night. So it's a little bit changing the psychology of individuals, but that's probably a good start for how I got into it, and I can kind of branch off into other discussions.
I know that most of the people that we work with want to look. They want to look better naked.
Sure.
Right? Athletes want to perform better on a performance side, and the general population, people want to look better naked, right? Mm-hmm. From an athlete standpoint, okay, I've read research and I've heard from things I've read that people who don't get enough sleep at night can see, I think they lose, what was it? I actually wrote it down. 6 hours of sleep per night or less, the time to physical exhaustion drops by 30%.
Yep.
So if you're a CrossFit athlete, an endurance athlete, any kind of soccer player, anybody that looks at, and I guess I would assume that's muscular exhaustion too, not just cardiovascular exhaustion, right? The night before any competition, you can get more tired 30% faster than normal. So my question to that is, a lot of people have pre-competition anxiety, right? Say somebody's going to go into a CrossFit competition on a Saturday. The night before, and I dealt with this in jiu-jitsu, right? The night before a jiu-jitsu tournament, dude, you don't sleep that well, right? You're nervous.
Yeah.
Can you do things leading up to that night before a competition? If you know poor sleep decreases performance, decreases coordination, faster to getting tired, testosterone levels or hormone levels can dip, what are some things that an athlete can do? Because you can't just tell them, oh, block it out and sleep great.
Sure.
What are some things that they can do a couple nights before, the week of, leading up to knowing I'm going to have some anxiety before that competition?
Well, I think the best strategy they can use is using maybe 4 weeks before the competition, using that as a preliminary experimentation period and figuring out what sleep hygiene habits contribute the most to improvements in sleep quality. For example, the three main drivers of sleep and the onset of sleep are typically temperature, light, and food consumption. And those in the research are referred to as, they call them circadian modulators, or there's other terms for them, but those three are going to be the main drivers. Mainly, as your temperature decreases over the course of the night, the evening and into the night, that's going to be a signal for your body to begin producing melatonin. Similarly, as the light begins to get lower and different wavelength, that is also stimulatory for melatonin production. And then also food production. If we think about this from kind of a logical perspective almost, the sun is typically setting as the day goes on, thus the temperature will drop. And then typically you'll find in most folks that their hunger will kind of peter out over the end of the day. So you'll eat dinner and then you find you may get a little bit hungry before you go to bed, but you won't find that typical increase in ghrelin, which is going to really spike and make you feel super hungry like you would before a normal meal. You might get that a little bit, but so it's a little counterintuitive, but those are our three main drivers. So in an athlete, they might try to decrease the temperature of their room and set it 2 or 3 degrees cooler than normal and see how that works out. They may also find that switching out the wattage of light bulbs in specific areas of their house and using lower wattage light bulbs can be very beneficial.
People say turn off 50% of the lights in your room than you normally would have.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just even simple things like not using overhead lights and using lamps,
Yeah.
that can help to diffuse the ambient light in the room. And you may not even realize it, but one of the biggest disruptors of that nighttime light is typically bathroom lights. When you go into bathrooms, most people have very well lit bathrooms because they want to be able to see in the mirror and really examine kind of the finer points of their hair or their face or their complexion, whatever it is. So if you can use even like a nightlight that you have in the bathroom, just turn that on. If you're just brushing your teeth, you don't really need that much light. And then the third one is looking at food consumption and testing out a few different things. For some people, they may find that they eat dinner and then they don't eat anything else for the rest of the night, and they sleep exceptionally well if they have a 4 to 5 hour gap in between their last meal and when they fall asleep. For others, they may find that they actually drop too low with their blood sugar and they don't have good blood sugar regulation, and that will actually allow them to wake up in the middle of the night. So having a small snack that's fairly well balanced with both a protein, fat, fiber source, that'll help kind of keep insulin fairly steady through the night, and that may be a good option to try as well. The third option is to just have a normal meal, a mixed macronutrient meal, and simply taper down the size slightly. Because I've noticed, at least anecdotally in myself, and then in others that I've made this recommendation to, if you go to bed super, super full, that can cause gastric distress a lot of times, but it can also tend to alter your hunger the next morning and then push that circadian rhythm out a little bit further. So when you normally get hungry in the morning, that actually extends it.
What about the thermodynamics of the food? Like they say your body wants to cool its temperature, right? Mm-hmm. If you eat late at night, could you actually increase your core temperature, making it harder for your body to sleep? Is that theoretically, does that make sense? Because there's dynamics to food, right?
Sure. Yeah, exactly. So you will burn energy, TEF, thermic effect of food. You will burn energy as you consume the food and then digest it. But if you look at temperature through the night, you will get a decrease in temperature at the onset of sleep. But then during sleep, you actually get an increase in body temperature. If you've ever woken up in the middle of the night and been super hot and sweaty, what you're finding there is that during sleep, your body's in a state of paralysis. But there are some centers in the brain that actually increase by up to 30% in their activity. So from like a cardiorespiratory perspective, you're getting a huge increase in metabolic output, and that's typically accompanied by a temperature increase. The reason why you need a temperature decrease is just to get the onset of sleep. And it's a fine line because as you're increasing that temperature throughout the night, if the ambient temperature is too warm and you go above baseline, then obviously you'll wake up. But if the ambient temperature is cooler, it helps that onset of sleep, and then it helps to maintain that temperature at a nice baseline throughout the night. So if you find that you're waking up, either you're super hungry or you're super hot at night, then that's where you may want to play around with that food consumption, because it may be, as you suggested, it may be an increase in temperature from that digestion, especially if you eat a super large meal. Like people talk about getting meat sweats after like Thanksgiving or things like that. If you're eating a meal like that large before you go to sleep, that could definitely do it.
So so let's hit a triggered subject. So I feel that if we can correlate people who want to lose weight, we can correlate lack of sleep to a person's inability to lose weight, right? Or lose fat.
100%.
So I feel like sometimes in some of my clients, that's the trigger. I'll tell them, it's like, do you realize poor quality of sleep is going to make it harder for your body to burn fat, right? And there's two things I tell people about sleep. Once you lose sleep, your body becomes stressed. Once you increase stress, you increase cortisol. Once you increase cortisol, you're more likely to store fat, especially in the stomach area, right? But one thing that not sleeping well will do is increase ghrelin, correct? Mm-hmm. So ghrelin is the hormone that tells us if we're hungry, right? Leptin tells us we're satisfied. Mm-hmm. Ghrelin tells us we're hungry. And as I was reading some research and then through the podcast with Dr. Walker, people who have a decreased pattern of sleep, don't sleep enough, eat an average of 200 to 300 calories per day more than someone who gets adequate sleep. So it could theoretically be said that the better you sleep, the more likely you are to be in a caloric deficit than burn fat. Are there hormonal, I guess, if you sleep better, are there things happening to your brain and in your body hormonally that help your body burn fat if you have a better quality of sleep?
For sure.
Talk about that, because I think if we can correlate quality of sleep to burning fat and losing weight, we know people have done a lot more to lose weight than just try to improve their sleep.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, there was a study that was published in 2010, title being "Insufficient Sleep Undermines Dietary Effects to Reduce Adiposity." And so the idea was that these individuals were on a calorie-restricted diet, so they were in a deficit, meaning that they were losing weight.
Yeah.
The number on the scale was going down. But what you found is that in the two groups, you had one group that was sleeping about 5.5 hours per night, another group that was sleeping about 8.5 hours per night. So the first group, you're probably going to find that you would classify those individuals as sleep deprived. In that group, what they found is that out of the weight lost, there was a reduction by 55% in percentage of fat mass lost.
Wow.
And there was an increase in the amount of fat-free mass, aka muscle, that was lost by 60%. Meaning that out of the total weight loss between the two groups, this group, the first group, the sleep-deprived group, lost more of the weight from muscle and less of it from fat, whereas the opposite was true in the sleep-sufficient group. So you look at something like that, and that's just very baseline, no biochemistry, no endocrinology, but it makes sense if you have somebody who has a longer period spent in this reparative, restorative state. It would make sense that a lot of the training adaptations that we're seeking are going to be enhanced even further. If you look at pulsatile secretions of hormones during sleep, growth hormone typically begins its onset at about 11 p.m. So if you have somebody who alters their circadian rhythm and shifts it later and later to where they're going to bed later and getting up earlier, not only are you dealing with a sleep-deprived individual, but now you have an individual whose circadian rhythm, that melatonin onset, should be occurring at around 9 p.m., 9:30 p.m. Now that's not occurring until about 12 p.m. So externally, they're functioning on East Coast time. Let's say they live in, Virginia. But internally, they're functioning on a 3-hour delay because that melatonin secretion isn't occurring until midnight when it should be occurring closer to 9 p.m. So now all of those physiological functions, which should be taking place for that 8-hour gap, are now only taking place for about 5.5, 6 hours. So you essentially turn the physiology on its head, and you're going to see changes not only in the periphery, but you're also going to see changes centrally. And some of the research now that's coming out on Alzheimer's is showing that we have this plaque called amyloid beta, or beta amyloid, depending upon who you talk to about it. And this is actually almost like you might call it the same sort of gummy plaque that you get in your pipes that just build up over time, soap scum. This builds up in the brain on the neurons, and it actually affects cognition and memory. So what they're finding is that in individuals who are well slept, a lot of this plaque gets removed at night. And in one study I was reading, they referred to sleep as a dishwashing cycle for the brain. It essentially helps clean out and restore the brain. So in those individuals that are short slept, you're going to find that there's not only an increase in all-cause mortality, but there's also an increase in cardiovascular dysfunction, physiological dysfunction, and cognitive dysfunction. So this is much, much wider than just losing fat and building muscle. This is a entire health and fitness perspective and well-being and longevity perspective that we have to take on sleep, rather than just pigeonholing it onto a specific body composition and aesthetic improvement.
So it's not that poor sleep keeps your body from burning fat. It's poor sleep actually makes you catabolic to burn muscle.
Yes, it makes you very inefficient at building muscle and burning fat. The opposite of what you want.
Sure. So it's a double whammy. It's not that you can't burn fat; you can't build muscle as efficiently because you're poor sleep.
Yeah.
General population people, right? Because there are going to be people that say, "Oh, I don't I don't need to address sleep because I don't really work out, right? Or I'm not an athlete. I'm not lifting. I'm just a normal person who gets up in the morning, maybe goes for a walk. The implications of poor sleep are still there, right?
Sure.
From cognitive function, recovery, mortality rate. I feel that one of the things that have led, I think this is one of those things where technology has kind of killed us, right? If we look at from what they call the hunter-gatherer side of things, when lights came out, when the sun came up, we woke up. When the sun came down, we start to relax and we go to bed. I know there's been studies where people have gone and lived out in the woods or in the country where there's no artificial light, and they naturally go to sleep 2 hours earlier than normal.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and it's not because they're bored. It's because melatonin rises, the sun goes down, they go to sleep, they fall, they get up when the sun comes up.
Yep.
I feel like that's how we're supposed to live as people, right? Is that way. If we were to give people some very simple tips, and I'll give people my top two, I give people all the time, how do I improve my sleep? And you can't really throw people a lot of changes right away. Right?
Yeah.
It's like if somebody's obese and they want to get in shape, you can't say go to the gym 5 days a week and cardio at night. You say start walking around, start eating less, right? You know, don't drink your calories, don't eat fast food, go for a 15-minute walk a day, right? Most of the people who come to me about sleep are at the very beginning people who are trying to improve their sleep because they've slept 4.5, 5 hours a night their whole life, right? Their patterns are so out of whack, and it really is a pattern thing. It's a lifestyle thing. It's not that they can't sleep. They just can't make the behavior modifications.
Sure.
The 2 or 3 things, I'll give you mine, and then you give them yours, and I hopefully we can start helping people and doing more on this. My first one is that glass of wine at night, shut it down, right? I don't consume alcohol, and I don't do it out of any kind of moral or body composite or whatever. Obviously, I don't want to drink the calories. I don't drink alcohol anymore because once you start sleeping better and you realize the quality of life, I mean, I can't beg people enough with this. The quality of life that you have with getting good sleep is immeasurable. It is not worth that 1.5 glass of wine. It's not worth any of that, right? When you understand, I literally tell people getting good sleep is like opening your eyes a little more and having more light come in. It is amazing how the quality of your life, the productiveness you have in your life with better sleep changes. I don't even know how to explain it other than it is a performance enhancing drug. So I tell people, number 1, quit drinking at night. Number 2, create a pattern, right? And that's hard for people. Go to bed and get up at the same time. I don't care if it's Saturday and Sunday, right? Once you do that, you'll realize, wow, it's not hard to go to bed at 10 and get up at 6:30 every day. It's really, you feel good. So I am so productive between 7 and 9 o'clock in the morning now. It's unbelievable. I get so much more done. I wake up, I do drink coffee, I do caffeine, but I don't do caffeine past noon. We had a conversation. Go to bed at the same time every day, right? Don't drink alcohol, right? And avoid the computer screen or wear blue light glasses. Avoid the computer screen at least an hour before you go to bed. And that seems to be the hardest one for people because they're on the phone, they're playing on Instagram, they're chatting with their friends, they're looking at the screen. When you put blue light glasses on and you have them on for an hour and then you take them off and look at the screen, it's almost painful.
Yeah.
It's almost like, whoa, like no wonder. Yeah. Blue light glasses decreases melatonin, increases serotonin, right? It messes with your patterns. You can't sleep. I used to be one of those guys that would work up until 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night on the computer, turn the computer off and go lay in bed and like, all right, ready to go to bed. You'd just be like,
nope.
It ain't happening, right? I'm up for an hour. And then what do? You check your phone. Then you go to the bathroom. Now it's 1:30. Now you get up at 6. I mean, it's unbelievable, right? And so my 3 biggest things are create a pattern, quit drinking alcohol, avoid the screens or false light. Outside of those 3, give us the next ones that you say people must do. Simple things that somebody can do to help improve their sleep. Now I do other things. I do, calm drink, right? I've been doing the creatine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Give us some other things that you think people can do to benefit getting better sleep.
Well, I think the first place I always start with people is what is free, because that's obviously the biggest barrier of entry is cost. So I think the three biggest things you can do is, number one, get outside during the day, and especially on sunny days if possible. I'll touch on that more in a second. Number two is I would go to bed before 11 p.m. if at all possible. If you have to get up really early, the earlier you can be in bed, the better. And I'll expound upon that as well. And then the third one I would say is any alarm clocks you have in your bedroom, turn them face down, flip your phone over, whatever you have to do to completely eliminate your ability to see time and to know what time it is during the course of the night. And that includes getting blackout curtains to prevent yourself from being able to see how high the sun is, and additional things like that. Give me a second.
Nice.
Yeah. So, number one, as I said, I'm outside. The biggest factor in getting outside is that the wavelength of light that you're going to be experiencing from direct sunlight is directly inversely proportional to the wavelength of light you would get inside. And I know a lot of people think you may walk into work or into a room at work or a room at your house and you have really, really high wattage bulbs in it, LED bulbs even, and you think, man, this is super bright. If you compare the wavelengths on a number scale, it's astronomically different. I'm talking like 10 to 100 times difference in sunlight versus indoor light. And the important thing with that light is that you're regulating circadian rhythms, not just based upon the rods and cones, the light receptors in your eye. There are also receptors in your skin. And so what happens is over the course of the day, based upon that light exposure, that will actually set the course of melatonin secretion during the course of the day and during the evening and then on to into the night. So the best thing you can do is if you can get out and go for a walk, even on your lunch break for 20 or 30 minutes, roll up your sleeves, get as much skin exposed to sunlight as possible, and then progressively build upon that. So over the course of a year or two, the more sun exposure you can gain and not get burned, the higher you're going to push up your vitamin D levels, the greater you're going to regulate your circadian rhythms, provided that you tag that along with tip number 2, which was going to bed before 11 p.m. You mentioned the need for regularity, and I would definitely agree that is a major stumbling block for a lot of people. But if you can hammer that in and get to bed before 11 p.m., you're going to be maximizing that growth hormone secretion that we talked about before.
Before 11 p.m.
Yeah, before 11 p.m.
Time you go to bed is just as important as the quality of time you get. Like going to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning but getting up at 10 is different than going to bed at 10 and getting up at 6.
Oh, for sure. In a lot of the collegiate athletes that I work with, they will have nagging injuries over the course of a season and even into the off season, into the course of the summer. And the first question I always ask them, hey, what time do you guys typically go to bed? 1, 2, 3, 4. What are you guys doing? Oh, we're playing Fortnite or
all the time, dude. Yeah, with college athletes. 100%.
Yeah, and I understand. College kids are going to be college kids. You got to enjoy life and have some fun. But what I have found interesting is that in those individuals who are typically more scholastically driven, they tend to go to bed around 11 o'clock, 11:30 each night. And at least anecdotally, these individuals don't struggle with injuries. And if they do, it seems that their recovery rate from those injuries is actually a little bit quicker than those who suffer from chronic injuries over the course of a season. So what you may find is that when you start to push that bedtime earlier and earlier, you get into deeper stages of REM, and the overall quality and refreshment that you feel from that sleep is massively different. Because I know, at least for myself, if I go to sleep at 2 and wake up at 10, that 8-hour gap, that is not even close to going to sleep at 10 and waking up at 6. Can't even compare.
I agree.
So those first two, again, getting outside, getting sunlight, setting the course for the day. If you can do that earlier in the morning, the better, especially like if you're eating breakfast.
If somebody could wake up in the morning, and I know people got kids, they got families, they got whatever, right? I get it.
Yeah.
This does take a time commitment. Like, I don't believe it when people tell me they don't have time to work out. Like, we all believe, hey, I got a buddy of mine, Tyler Harris, right? He's one of the guys that doesn't sleep. He's one of my outlier guys. That dude has probably the busiest schedule of anybody I've ever met. Trains 4 days a week. So I'm literally going to bring him on a podcast one day and be like, Tyler, pull up your calendar. Show this to other people. You have a family and a kid in a traveling business. Show people where you work out, and we're going to end this conversation if it's too busy. So I understand it's busy. But if somebody could get up in the morning and go for a walk, if somebody could go for a morning in the morning and get up and go for a walk, that would be the ideal time.
Yeah, and this doesn't have to be, a 20 to 30 minute set block. You can break it up into 10-minute blocks throughout the day. So first thing you do, wake up in the morning, get outside. If it's spring or summer when the weather's starting to get warmer, sit outside for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, drink your coffee, take some time just to chill. You don't have to rush around. The worst thing you can do in the morning is pick up your phone and immediately look at your phone or check your email or social media. Don't do it.
Oh, so guilty.
Put your phone on airplane mode at night and don't turn it on, off airplane mode essentially, until 30 minutes after you've woken up, an hour after you've woken up, whenever you really need to address that stuff. But take that 10 minutes, sit outside, let your eyes get adjusted to the natural light. And over time, then you can build that into a longer habit in the morning and start to establish those good habits. But then take 10 minutes at lunch, eat lunch for 20 minutes, go outside for 10 minutes. You don't have to walk around. Just stand outside, literally look outside. If you're sitting near a window, just simply look at stuff outside. The more sun exposure and the more ambient light exposure you can get in your eyes earlier in the day, the better off you're going to be. So don't feel like this has to be I got to carve out 20 minutes early in the morning, so I got to wake up earlier. Don't do all that. Just break it up into small little sections throughout the day. And then the third tip is if you have an alarm clock, flip it down. If you have a phone, flip it over. Better yet, set your phone on your dresser away from your bedside table. Anything which prevents you from waking up in the middle of the night and then looking at that number. Because what a lot of people will do is, kind of a cliche term, but they'll start to do this mental math and they'll say, well, it's 3:30, so if I have to get up at 6, that means I got 2.5 hours.
All the time, dude.
Yeah, and if they're somewhat clued in on sleep and sleep research, they're thinking, well, every sleep cycle is 90 minutes. So if I got 2.5 hours, let's see, that's 150 minutes. So 150 divided by 90, how many sleep cycles is it? Yeah. And now we've essentially started the snowball rolling down the hill. So the more blank you can keep your mental slate at night and the less things you have to consider if you got to wake up and use the restroom, all you got to figure out is where's the door and how do I not trip over stuff and break something. That's all you got to think about. You don't want to be thinking about the alarm clock or anything else.
Clear the path to the bathroom before you go to bed. That's the final tip.
Yeah.
And good.
And I was going to say, even better yet, if your bathroom is located close to your bed, get really low level night lights. Don't turn on the lights at night in the bathroom. I know this may be tougher for people that are older that kind of have a potential fall risk or something like that. But if possible, the more you can keep the lights off at night, the better off you are. If you look at research, even very brief exposures to light in the middle of the night will drive down acute melatonin production. So the more you can keep those lights off, even better if you can keep them off totally and you just know your house mentally and you can kind of feel your way around very gently. That's your best strategy in the middle of the night.
One of the best tips I got from Jeff Nichols early on, which is probably 6 years ago when I first heard him talk about sleep. And he's got a great story. If anybody wants to hear his story, is unbelievable. He was in special forces in his body. If you know anything about those guys, their body's broken when they get out. Those guys are testosterone hormone. I mean, their bodies.
Right. Yeah.
And he did a bunch of research on sleep just to get his body back to a normal, right? But one of the first things he ever said that I did was I slept in the black room, blacked out room. How many people do you know say, I got to sleep with the TV on?
Yeah.
Oh, man, that drives me insane. No, you don't. Yeah. Like, that's the first thing. And they can't get away from that. Sleep aids. Okay. I know so many kids, and I got in this cycle when I was a kid, taking NyQuil to sleep. Mm-hmm. Even melatonin is something I've got away from. Mm-hmm. When I do it, I do it differently now. I take it on an empty stomach around 7 or 8, but I do it a couple days a week. That's it.
Yeah.
And I probably am going to decrease that to 0. I'm going to quit taking it. Mm-hmm. I do take the calm drink, which is basically just magnesium.
Yep.
I take 10 grams of creatine at night. I remember, what do we say? The research said 20, so I do 20. Like you recommended people start with 5 and 5. I was like, nah, I'm going straight to 10 and 10. Right? When I got the first tattoo, I'm getting a sleeve. I'm not getting a couple. But sleep aids, pros and cons. When do you recommend them? When do you not? Do you still stay away from them? Don't start taking it. Give me your 2 or 3 minute little glip on things like that. Now, obviously, NyQuil's for when you have the flu. It's not for when you need to pass out. Sedative sleep is not sleep, right? I learned that from the thing. Sedative sleep is not sleep. Melatonin or those natural sleep aids. Give me your quick little, and we'll finish on this. Give me your quick little yay or nay or win or yes or no.
Sure. Prescription sleep aids are generally a very, very poor route. And you will experience sleep, but it will not be the same quality or type of sleep that you would get naturally. So with things like Ambien, those will, to back up, you have 4 stages of lighter sleep, stages 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then you have this deeper stage REM sleep. So what Ambien does is it bypasses those first 4 stages and drops you right into REM sleep. So people take it, knock out, and they think, oh man, I slept so good, like I'm groggy when I wake up. That's actually indicative of either one, if you're that groggy, you slept and then you woke up in the middle of a sleep cycle, or 2, you are so heavily sedated that you can't bring your brain out of that sedated state to function normally and have normal cognition. So with sleep aids, if you delve into the research, there's actually a lot of really disappointing and almost depressing research if you have to take sleep aids, that there's a higher cause mortality with sleep aids, especially long term. So if you're going to use any sort of sleep aid, beyond the sleep hygiene tips that we've already talked about, those need to be investigated first. So always think lifestyle first before supplementation. And reason being, what your body is going to go through in those stages biochemically, you can't mimic that with any sort of sleep aid that's currently available in the market, prescription or natural. It's not possible.
Scary stuff, dude.
Yeah.
Ambien scary stuff. I don't know if you heard Richard Sorenek, still man. He had a car wreck, middle of the night.
I did hear about the car wreck.
Took Ambien. Not sure if it's more or what details. Took an Ambien, got up in the middle of the night, packed his hunting gear like he was going hunting, got in his car, pulled out, and drove right over into the bridge. Woke up, no clue what happened.
Holy cow.
Broke his nose, chest, ribs, femur, fractured a lot. That's scary stuff, dude. And I've heard multiple stories on Ambien that it's bad news, right? Yeah. So obviously prescription stuff. What about like a melatonin style?
Yeah, I see we had this question about frequent travelers back and forth across the country, and that's actually where I was headed with the melatonin comment. Okay. Melatonin would be the one natural sleep aid that I would say would be the first thing to investigate. But melatonin, most people take it and say, well, this is going to help me sleep. Well, if you look at melatonin, it has a half-life of about 30 minutes, just regular melatonin. So most people will pop 5 grams. That's what a typical melatonin is.
Yeah.
That's a ton of melatonin to start, but you'll knock out really easily. But a lot of people find that they'll wake up 3 to 4 hours later and they can't get back to sleep. So what's happened is typically over the course of the night, melatonin will gradually increase, and that will cause the onset of sleep. And then once you begin to get into those deeper stages of sleep and through a few sleep cycles, it will taper off, and then cortisol comes up in the morning to wake you up. So if you have this huge spike in melatonin and then it immediately drops back down to baseline, well, it's obvious your body assumes that because of this large amplitude and increase, it's not spread out this way, it's spread out this way. And so you ramp up and then all of a sudden drop back down to baseline. So your body's thinking, well, I had this huge melatonin peak. Obviously, we just went through a lot of sleep cycles. You wake yourself up. So if possible with melatonin, look for extended release formulas. And I was just looking at a product the other day called micro melatonin, I believe the name was. And it's a new extended release form, which allows for more digestion within the first 4 hours and then extended release through the last 5 hours or 4 hours. So with melatonin, what you want to think about is it's a hormone, and it is mainly used to shift circadian rhythms either forward or backward. So it's not just about taking melatonin to fall asleep, it's about when you take the melatonin and what that's actually doing to your circadian rhythm at that time. So if you're going West Coast and you're staying there for an extended period of time, then starting to take that melatonin when you would normally go to sleep, 9 p.m. ideally, 10 p.m., anytime in between that hour time window, take the melatonin, again, extended release if possible, and then get yourself regulated to that circadian rhythm for the time being. When you fly back, you can use the same strategy, take the melatonin again, and what you're doing is essentially physiologically, you're telling your brain, hey, I'm having this influx of melatonin at around 9 p.m., regardless of what time zone I'm in. So now, as that melatonin starts to increase and then slowly taper off, again, time release, your brain will then subsequently go through those normal stages of sleep because melatonin is produced naturally. It's not like you're supplementing yourself with something that's exogenous pharmaceutically.
Sure.
So that would be your best bet is take some melatonin with you. If you can't regulate your sleep hygiene naturally with the tips that we've mentioned, getting outside, regularity, things like that, then start to use some melatonin, especially if you travel across time zones. But the thing that I will say is once that circadian rhythm has been regulated with melatonin and you're waking up and going to bed at the same time, even if you're still using the melatonin, you got to make sure you maintain that regularity. Over the course of time, you should be able to remove that melatonin, and again, you'll find that natural peak and then dip will occur. If you don't remove the melatonin, it becomes a supplementary crutch, and you may find that you get down regulations of melatonin production within the brain. So if you're getting sun exposure throughout the day, a lot of that melatonin that would be normally produced, or the serotonin that's produced that's converted into melatonin, that production may be lowered because your body is receiving supplemental support. So that's just something to keep in mind with melatonin secretion or melatonin supplementation. Start with the lowest dose possible. You can get pills that are scored, meaning you can cut them with a knife. And the brand that I use, it allows comes in 6 milligram pills. You can score them in half and score them in half, so you can get a 1.5 milligram dosage. And I find I only need about 3 milligrams, and that's typically only on times when I'm really, really wired, doing work late into the night, to kind of reset that clock. The next night, I'll take one.
Come out with a melatonin product or a sleep product.
Who's that?
Thorne.
Okay.
Thorne's come out with something. They're usually generally pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. Again, people have asked, well, what's the best place to get a melatonin supplement in terms of sourcing? You have to be very, very careful, especially if you're going to get CVS or Walmart. Walmart was just in a huge lawsuit in the last 2 or 3 years. A lot of their products on the shelves were pulled. When they were tested by a third-party lab, they found out that none of the components on the label were actually in the product, like 0 milligrams, none. That wasn't the case necessarily for melatonin, but there were other lesser-known subjects or lesser-known supplements, echinacea, St. John's wort, these random supplements not a whole lot of people use, but those were the main offenders. So you have to be very careful with those companies. I looked at another study that tested, I believe it was 30 or 35 brands of melatonin, and looked at the actual amount of supplemental melatonin in the capsule that was provided. Some of them had as much as 2 or 3 times the labeled amount of melatonin in the capsule. So if you think you're taking a 5 milligram capsule and you're getting 15 milligrams, that's a huge amount of melatonin. And some of the capsules actually contain serotonin, and you can actually run into issues with serotonin if the person is taking something like an SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. There's also things called serotonin sickness, where you have way too much serotonin in the bloodstream, not only supplementally, but also what's produced internally. So if you combine those two, you run into big, big issues. So again, if you're going to purchase a melatonin supplement, find somebody who has a professional account with suppliers like Metagenics, Thorne, Designs for Health, Poliquin, ATP Science, Biotics Research, any of these higher level companies. If you approach the people, if someone wants to order a melatonin supplement through one of those companies, I have a practitioner account with all of them, and I'd be more than happy to place the order for you. But again, you can't get them through Walmart or CVS or any of these well-known retailers because the quality of ingredients is so high. So just be careful with your sourcing on even products like
It goes
melatonin.
across supplements in general, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Across the supplement business or industry in itself is pretty flawed.
Yeah,
For
sure.
People know I'm not very into supplements in general, mostly because A, there's not a lot of research on it, and B, I just don't trust the people that bottle it.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, man, I hope that helps people. We've been wanting to do this sleep one. We'll be doing more of these, and we'll sign off, and we'll see what people's feedback is. And I think we can go into some other podcasts here covering other topics, and we'll get some feedback on the page, and we'll go from that, man. But I think this is an important topic. I appreciate it, bro.
Yeah, man.
I'm gonna talk to you.
Sounds good.